Ова е споменикот на Холокаустот во центарот на Берлин, кој му дава почит на 6 милиони евреи убиени од страна на нацистите. Огромен лавиринт, кој го символизира хаосот и дезориентираноста во која се најде оваа популација, но и простор во кој се изгуби хуманизмот во времето на нацистичка Германија. Овој споменик е само еден од многуте изрази на жалење и каење што Германија си го дозволи Хитлер, кој го приреди најголемиот ужас на човештвото. Германија го прифати предизвикот сама да бине низ лавиринтот и да го пронајде повторно својот пат по Втората светска војна. Процесот на помирувањето низ кој мина и се уште минува Германија, денеска се смета како темел на низиниот успех да се издигне од хаосот и пепелта на војната во една од најстрашните епизоди во историјата на човештвото. Во екот на економската криза во Европа, Германија напредуваше. Таа порасна и стана четврта по големина економија во светот. Оваа иста држава на крајот на Втората светска војна пред само 70 години лежеше во урнатини. Голем дел од нејзината инфраструктура, вклучувајќи и главните пристаништа и железнички центри, беа силно бомбардирани од сојузничките воздушни сили. Градот Дрезден беше целосно уништен. Повеќе од 7 милиони германци ги загубија животите за време на војната. Населението на Келн, например, падна од 750.000 на 32.000. И морално, Германија се најде скршена, бидејќи беа откриени страшните детали за систематското убивање од страна на нацистите на 11 милиони евреи, пољаци, руси, роми, хомосексуалци и други. Сепак, Германија се излече од оваа длабока бездна за да стане една од највлијателните нации. Многумина ја гледаат земјата како срце на Европската унија. Во анкетата на BBC, например, во 2014 година, Германија беше рангирана на првото место по популарност, со 60% од меѓународната заедница оценета позитивно. Како Германија стигна до овој успех, или уште попрецизно, како беше надмината сенката на Хитлер?
So my name is Rainer Hess. I'm the grandson of the former commandant of the Auschwitz extermination camp. I'm 54 years old, father of 4 kids and 5 grandkids.
Дедото на нашиот соговорник, Рудолф Хес, е еден од најозлогласените нацисти, индустријски убиец, кој го создаде Аушвиц и во обид поефикасно да ги извршува наредбите на Хитлер, во логорот прв го применува пестицидот Зиклон Б, со кој во гасните комори на Аушвиц се убиени повеќе од милион евреи. Да се носи генот на ваков злостоник е драма која ни ја раскажува Рајнер. Прв пат ќе се соочи со хипотеката која е осуден да ја носи целиот живот во раното детство, во средината на 70-тите години.
I had the first activity with the name in an age of 10-11. So when I was in a boarding school, I made some mistakes like kids do, stolen food with my comrades in the school, and we were caught and handed over to the gardener to make the dirty work there. And he received a list from the director and with the name on it, and he saw Hess. So and the first thing he called the secretary and asked her, said, "Who is the father to that young man? His name?" And she said, "Hans-Jürgen." So what I not know in that moment, he was one of the 30 gardeners in the villa of my grandfather. He was a prisoner. So he has the number on his arm. So, and what happens, I think I have not to explain very well. So his revenge. So a victim on one side became a perpetrator. So the role of his behavior changed completely.
Against you?
Yeah.
So what he did?
Oh, it was like beaten up. And he yelled on me like my grandfather maybe yelled on him. So I never really could find out in which way, but I not behaved, I not worked very well, I was always too late. So all these blamings you do to people to treat them.
Во своето рано детство, оваа горчлива вистина во неговото семејство bila tabu, no во тоа време, во средината на 70-тите, образовниот систем на Германија е веќе фокусиран на траумите од минатото. Рајнер, на своја 10-годишна возраст, ќе го посети Дахау, каде неговиот дедо исто така бил на служба пред да оди во Аушвиц.
So my class teacher took me out of that course, and gave me the opportunity to go with him to Dachau, the first concentration camp my grandfather was in. So we went there and I saw all these blocks in these showcases about Rudolf Hess and how many people he killed, how industrial he made that killings. On one hand, of course, I was shocked, but in an age of 10, 11, you not really realize who that man is.
По оваа школска посета за Рајнер почнуваат да се отвараат многу прашања.
So we traveled back to the boarding school and I called my dad and asked him what happens, how that guy belongs to us in the family, to me. And he said, no, it's a spelling mistake. It should be called Rudolf Hess, the deputy of Hitler. So in that moment, everything was done for me. Okay, it was an explanation and you trust your parents.
Но сомнежите не запираат. На своја 15-годишна возраст Рајнер ќе се соочи со вистината во своето семејство, пошто започнува и семејната драма.
So after that, when I was 15 and started my training as a cook, to become a cook, I came home and my mom's hallway was full of books. She reads a lot in the bookshelves, and I saw these two books. And before I could grab them out of the shelf, my dad was beside me and I got slapped, and I had no clue why again. So I didn't make anything wrong, I only looked about books. I went down to my mom and asked her and said, what happens? What means this? I said, okay, your dad is leaving. He's on a business trip to Sweden. And when he is gone, you got the chance to read these books. She did. She gave the books to me. I read these books, and after that, I left my parental home.
Immediately after you finished the book?
Yeah, I was so shocked. And I think it was not really the shock in the first wave about my grandfather and what he did. I think it was the point that my father lied against me, that he not told me the truth. And it would be so easy to tell the kids the truth and said, okay, he made this. I not take my aunt or my father responsible for what happens in the Second World War. They were kids as well. So how could they be responsible for it? But it was a crack in my personal issues between my father and me. That's why I left it.
Рајнер го напушта домот и трга во потрага по вистината. Сака да запознае некој од преживеаните во Аушвиц. Се среќава со берберот на неговиот дедо, Јозеф Пачински. Се среќаваат во Краков.
I think the first time it was Joseph Paczynski, the barber of my grandfather. And we met in Krakow, in the synagogue, in the new synagogue. He was sitting there, our translator was there, and then he said to me, walk along, go a little bit, a few meters in front, and came back. I did. And then he said, okay, your shoulders are a little bit wider, you're a little bit taller, and your voice is a little bit darker, but you look exactly like your grandfather. And that hits me. I said, oh God. And then you start, and that's a process of thinking, where he said, okay, what I have inherited from him, what belongs to him, can I be the same criminal like he was, the same killer like he was? So it belongs in the DNA, in the blood? And then you start researching. And then you find out, no, I'm really individual for myself. I'm the person I am.
Рајнер прво посакува да го промени своето име и презиме, за да се ослободи од ужасот на неговата семејна меморија, но сепак одлучува да го задржи како алатка во борбата против екстремната десница во Германија и почнува соработка со преживеаните од Аушвиц, кои се воедно и негова терапија. Тие луѓе стануваат и негово ново семејство.
So you decided to leave the family, but you keep the name?
Yeah.
Why?
I think it's the best weapon I can use against the far right. So to show that there is a possibility, if you have that name, inherited that name, means not that you have inherited the cruelty of the ancestors. So, and I really use it against the far right. In collaboration with Jewish survivors, and I have a lot of really close friends from the Jewish survivor side. So one lady, Eva Moses Kor, she was one twin out of the Mengele experiments of twins. And she adopted me 2014 symbolically in Auschwitz on the selection platform in Birkenau.
Во оваа автопсихотерапија, Рајнер решава да истетовира бројка, иста каква што имале заробените евреи во Аушвиц.
I said, so what can you give to a survivor? What can you give these persons as a kind of respect? So, like Eva passed away, her number is on my chest. So she lives now. Her number lives on my chest. And she was clear when she saw that. She said, okay, wow, you really punished yourself in that way, but I really like it. It's better than a chocolate cake. So that was her sentence. And Joseph Paczynski the same. And it happens that often when we met with Joseph Paczynski as well, that he said, okay, Rainer, open your shirt. I have to touch it again. So now I'm part of you and you are part of me. It gives like a cooperation between us.
Рајнер истапува и јавно. Објавува книга со наслов «Наследството на командантот». По објавата на неговите први јавни настапи во кои зборува против злоделата на дедо му, настанува нова драма во семејството.
When my book came out and I started my activities against the family, you never heard a word of the family. They never came to a conclusion in any ways. So they really hide their existence. So, and that was a point for me where I said, okay, I'm right.
You have brothers or sisters?
I have a brother.
And so how the relation with him are?
I have no relation with him. I'm never in contact with him either.
And how he faced this part of his reality?
He's really neutral, or in some ways he really goes on the side of my father. Well, he's in contact with my father, and he was not in contact with my mom. So I think that explains everything.
За разлика од неговиот брат, неговата братучетка во Австралија е активист на екстремната неонацистичка организација.
So I have a cousin, she lives in Australia, and she is, how you call it, like the vice president of the White Aryans, supremists.
Nowadays?
Yeah, of course. And she wrote a blog, in a blog that she loves Rudolf Hess and what he is doing, and it's better the Jews leaving that planet. So things like that. If it's word by word, it's a long time ago.
So the fighting within the family continue?
Yeah. I'm permanent in trouble with the family. They call me the black sheep. I'm the traitor of the family. And one of my aunts said, okay, he opens the Pandora's box. He gives the secrets out.
Таткото на Рајнер ја криел вистината и од неговата сопруга, мајката на Рајнер, која за незината семејна врска дознава од вестниците.
So when my parents married in 1957, my mom didn't know nothing about her father-in-law, who he is or what he was, what he did, nothing. So it was a secret in Germany as well. So, and Hess was not really a prominent Nazi in that period. So, and then he comes to the Frankfurt trial, the Frankfurt Auschwitz trial, and the first articles were launched in the newspapers, and it was Stern magazine, and they called it the gas man of Auschwitz. So, and my mom's aunt runs over and said, look, your family is in the newspaper. And she said, what? And she saw the first time about the commander of Auschwitz and how many killings he made. And then she asked my dad, it was 1962, 1963, and she asked my dad what that means. And he said, do you have any problems with it? So he was really cold in that way.
Кога Рудолф го напушта домот, неговата мајка се разведува од татко му. Мајка му се придружува на синот во подрагата по вистината за нивното семејство.
2009 was the first time there, and I took my mom with me, with Thomas Harding. We were there. And it was not really that time to visit a villa. First of all, we have to check around, and it was it was in a way really strange to see what he creates. It was really heavy stuff to know whatever you put your hand on, it's created by him. So, and since then, I never put my hands out of my pockets when I'm in Auschwitz. So we went there, and it was really hard for my mom. So, and after 2 days, we left. And it was hard, of course, on the other side. Well, people realized, so they got informed, I don't know who, but they got informed that we are there. So, and in that moment, we were never alone.
Never alone in which sense?
Like the security were around us.
Do you feel, by any means, some guilt nowadays?
No. No. How can I feel guilt? I was not even born. I did not commit any crimes in that period. The only thing I really feel deep inside, I'm ashamed about what the family did and that they act like they act right now. Denying, glorifying. How can you do things like that?
Животната драма на Рудолф е само една од морето слични во повојна Германија. Бурата прашања за родителите и нивната улога во времето на фашизмот доаѓа со студентските масовни протести во Германија во 1968-та, кога повојната генерација созрева и бара одговори за минатото на нивните родители.
For my generation, the generation after this generation, who was somehow also responsible for this time, it was very difficult to deal with that because, first of all, we had to ask our parents to tell us how that could happen. And these questions and these discussions in many families were very painful, but necessary. So there was also conflict in the generation. You see that, for example, in Germany in the 68s, the revolution of 68, of the students' revolution, where this generation of 68 started to question very, very strongly the values of the Nazi times and the values of the education they had, and the values also in our institutions, like in universities and schools, the way how to deal with the history and so on. So we are the generation after the war generation, let's call it the war generation. And for us it was not easy, but it was very necessary to do this work. Because we had not to question history, we also had to question our parents.
Франк Моравиц, денес голем пријател на Балканот, активен во процесот на франко-германското помирување, е еден од милионите германци кои се соочуваат со минатото на сопственото семејство. Тој е од првите генерации кои во школите во Германија учат за сите ужаси починети од нацистите во фашистичка Германија. Образовниот процес кај него отвара многу други внатрешни процеси.
The real moment where I started to question this time was when I was 14 or 15, and when I learned in school more about Holocaust, for example. When I learned in school more about the way how this regime was functioning, how it came that Hitler came to power, for example. And this was a shock for me. This was really a shock for me. And then I started also to question my parents. And I asked my mother how you could support that, how you could live in this Nazi society, how my father could be a soldier in this society, for example. He was a soldier during the Second World War. So I questioned the parents then, and this is on a personal level. And it's, on the one hand, you had this education in school, which was very strong in this time, and we were speaking a lot about Holocaust. But it's a difference if you are questioning one part of the history or if you are questioning your own family in a certain way.
Првите сознанија за блиската историја на неговата Германија, како и тоа дека неговиот татко бил офицер во германската армија, го насочуваат кон потрага по минатото на својот татко.
I got answers, but I understood when I was 15, 16 years old, and additionally this education in the school, I understood that these answers were very personal and subjective answers, that it is only part of the truth, what is also normal. So I'm not accusing my parents for this, but and that it is my work to complete this picture. I also understand that when you come out, when I put myself in the shoes of my parents and you come out of a dictatorship, that you need also a certain distance through the years and to build a picture about that. I think it was not only painful for us, it was also painful for my parents and for this generation. No, they are always, until today I have open questions. Until today, especially when I think about the state of the society today and the problems we have today, I think about these questions, and there is never a final answer. It's a permanent thinking process.
Неговото трагање кон минатото на неговиот татко не му носат многу созданија, но секако му отвараат уште многу прашања и дилеми.
I checked documents because I wanted to know what happened, and I wanted to know what was his role into that. And this was a 15 years process. There are different archives here in Germany, but also elsewhere, where you can check persons. So I found out that my father was an officer in the war. I found out that he was one of the first officers of the Wehrmacht occupying Prague. I found out that he was an officer in Poland. And I mean, when you go in the history and you look how it was in Poland and especially in Poland and in Czech Republic when it comes to, for example, deportation of Jewish people, then I have some questions. I have questions logically. I have questions about his role. And so I tried, and also my father went through, after the Second World War, through the denazification process of the US. So in the end, there was nothing. I mean, officially there was nothing. He went out through the denazification process without any guilt, official guilt. But I also know, I could be happy with this question and say, okay, but I also know that the denazification process was one moment reduced in a very strong way from the sides of the Americans and British. That was only strong in the very beginning, but then it becomes less and less. So I found nothing, I have to say. So, but then one moment, for me, I understood that maybe it's not so important to know really what my father did, but it's much more important to know how to understand the mechanisms, how a whole society could allow that the Nazi regime and that Hitler came to power. And this is a very interesting question, how it comes that a society which is, I mean, Weimar Republic was a democratic republic, how it comes that a democracy is shifting to a dictatorship and shifting to a Hitler and Nazi regime.
Франк е само еден од таа генерација која совеста ја тера да истрази што правеле нивните родители во времето на Хитлер и неговите злодела. Во многу семејства се случувале драми и разделби.
Yeah, and a lot of people braked with their parents, you know. I mean, they stopped any contact with their parents. Not.
So, you know some of them, somebody like.
I know people. I mean, as you said, in the 70s, when we were, 15, 20, also as a result of the 68th generation, we started to ask our parents in a very open way. We asked for their responsibility. We asked what were their role into this. And these were difficult and sometimes really painful discussions, also in my family. I know people, they cut the contact with their parents completely. And took it maybe again years later. But this was a very difficult situation. But this came clearly after 68, not before.
Соочена со хаосот поствоена Германија, И сознанието дека ќе биде неопходно во детали да се истражи блиското минато и начинот на кој функционирал системот на Хитлер, со цел да се обезбедат одговори на многуте прашања кои се поставуваат пред секој германец, политичката елита по војната го иницира формирањето на Институтот за современа историја во 1949 година. Овој институт добил задача систематски да го истражи лудилото на Хитлерова Германија. Во Берлин бевме во овој институт да добиеме детали за процесот на помирувањето на германците со сопствената историја.
Yeah, the institute was created in the aftermath of the Second World War by several politicians mainly from different parts of German political parties, for the main reason that they were convinced that university historians would not be able to do proper basic research on the history of the Third Reich for several reasons. First of all, because German historians in that period often regarded themselves as being part of official state narratives. They were very close to the state. And so people who were critical of the university historians were of the opinion that there should be an institution which should be independent of universities and which be able to concentrate fully on the analysis of the history of the Third Reich and of course on its prehistory. That was one reason. The second reason was that you of course need an institution where you can build up an archive and collect material as a basis for further research with a big library, and a university chair is normally not able to do this over a period of several years or even decades. So that was the reason why the Institute for Contemporary History was founded in 1949. We received a complete set of the documents of the Nuremberg trials as a starting point, and we have collected thousands of documents and papers ever since. And we have about a library of about 230,000 to 240,000 volumes specializing on the history of the Third Reich and its international context since 1945. So we have the biggest special library on this topic, I would say, in Europe. So people who do research on the Third Reich and on National Socialism come to Munich to do this in our library and with our archives, and so this is a part of the process.
Соочувањето со блиското минато во Германија со оглед на тежината на злосторствата кои се откривале долги години по завршувањето на војната, се одвиваше споро и во различни етапи, со оглед на тоа што низ системот се уште се провлекувале луѓе кои на еден или друг начин имале што да сокријат за нив самите.
In the 1950s you have the narrative that the Third Reich was a totalitarian regime. Totalitarian regime in Germany, like the totalitarian regime in the Soviet Union. So you have a dictator at the top, Hitler and Stalin. You have a certain group of people who are supporting him and who are in charge of the totalitarian rule, and you have the people below. That was the interpretation in the 1950s, which was very common and very welcome by most parts of the German society, because it is some sort of, you can push away your own responsibility. But it was on the background of the Cold War, very welcome narrative. And then in the 1960s, sources come up, people ask more questions, and they are not able any longer to have this simple narrative of, well, there was just at the top a few responsible and the people below who were just doing their job. So you learn more about the Third Reich, you ask more about the structures, you ask how institutions are run, how is the Wehrmacht run, how are the concentration camps run, and then you have a look at the people who are responsible for these structures, and you ask for structural questions. That was the main focus of the 1960s. One aspect of this looking at structures is that you do not necessarily look at specific people at this time. So you look how structures are competing with each other, agencies competing with each other and therefore giving dynamics, but not necessarily looking who are the people in these agencies. So that is again a way of not looking too detailed into personal lives and biographies. That again changed in the 1970s. In the 1970s you have a closer look on institutions like the Wehrmacht. In the end of the 1970s there's a huge book on the way the Soviet prisoners of war were treated, that around 3 million were left to starve to death by the German army, with a clear decision. They knew beforehand they would not be able to feed these people when they will capture them. And that this research came out by the end of the 1970s, and it developed into a public discussion, but not necessarily into a wide discussion with the whole of the society. But that was the research which came up. And then again, I repeat myself, in the 1980s you have a more clear question. A lot of people were now dead or no longer in responsible positions where they could veto things. So there was a more of a research on the question of the details of the persecution process. Who actually were the people who were running concentration camps and death squads and things like that.
Во 70-тите години во образовниот систем се внесуваат сите детали за тоа што се случувало за време на фашизмот. Колку повеќе информации, толку повеќе и нови прашања и толку поголем предизвик да се разбере како воопшто можел да се случи таков монструозен систем.
In the school curricula, it only started in the 1970s and from then on to have a detailed part. And this is part of this process, what I mentioned before, this history from below. Since the late 1970s, you have pupils' competition, or a foundation triggered a competition that in schools, people write, or school classes start to collect and write about topics of the Third Reich, for example. When I was at school in the late 1970s, we participated in such a project about social life during the Third Reich. And so you as a pupil deal with what happened during the Third Reich in your area. And only through this kind of individual interest and research, you suddenly have a huge amount of new questions and also knowledge. And this triggers this. And the main point for every new generation is to have an open discussion about this. I mean, the real danger having such a past is not to talk about it and not to discuss the reasons for it.
Љубопитството не одведе и во источниот дел на Берлин. Да видиме што се случувало зад Берлинскиот зид во источна Германија во времето на комунизмот и како тие се однесувале кон минатото на Германија. Се сретнавме со пратеничката во Бундестагот од Демохристијанската партија, која патем по падот на Берлинскиот зид и отварањето на досијата на Штази, откри дека не било кој, туку нејзиниот сопруг бил врбуван на тајната полиција да дава информации за нејзините активности на универзитетот.
We were brought up with the feeling that there are no Nazis in East Germany at all. All the Nazis, all the former Nazis are in West Germany. But this was, of course, not true. Yeah? We had several former Nazi functionaries in high places in East Germany, but they never admitted this. Yeah? So it came to a shock to me when one day, I think it was in the late 60s, when one day it was discovered that one of the most notorious physicians of a concentration camp, who had murdered thousands and thousands of people, lived in East Germany, and it was only uncovered, as I said, in the 60s. And this was a shock because the younger people of East Germany thought that there are no Nazis in our country at all. Later, we learned that many Nazis had been in the government, in the Central Committee of the Communist Party, and in high places. There is such a thick volume of, it is called Brown Book of East Germany, and it contains all the Nazi functionaries who had high positions in East Germany after the war.
Инаку во денеска поранешниот дел од Источна Германија, радикалните десничарски и левичарски партии уживаат најголема поддршка, што според професорот Магнус Брехтген е резултат на отсуството на процесот на помирувањето, низ кој минале западните германци.
But East Germany, the people living in Eastern Germany and the Eastern German society were told before 1990 that they had nothing to do with the Third Reich, because they were in a tradition of the workers' movement, and that the workers' movement was against fascism, so they had nothing to do with, not at all, so they did not have to pose self-critical questions. This is a delusionary view, because the people in Eastern Germany lived from 1945 to 1990 in an authoritarian rule by the Communist Party. Before 1945, they lived in an authoritarian dictatorial rule by National Socialism. Before 1933, they lived in democratically critical. Before 1918, they lived in the German Empire with this whole Prussian tradition. And the former East Germany, most of its area is either Prussia or Saxony and so on. And what I mentioned about this authoritarian tradition, back to the Middle Ages, so to speak, is very much still in the tradition of people in this former GDR area thinking after 1990. So that people from that area, if they look at political problems of the present, they often look at these problems or for the solutions with having this authoritarian, either left-wing or right-wing solutions in mind. And that is the reason why political parties of the far left and the far right in these Eastern German territories have a far wider electoral support as in West Germany. And the reason for that is that you haven't have this 45 years of very self-critical westernization, you may call it, self-critical analysis of your own past and an understanding of what the present-day challenges mean for your own political outlook on how a society should work.
По падот на желената завеса и демократизацијата и обединувањето на Германија, и вистината стига во овој дел на земјата. Веднаш по промените во 90-тите, во образованието влегуваат сите содржини за деструктивноста на фашизмот.
Oh, they learn this all the time, in not only in history lessons, but also in ethic lessons and so on. And I think, and there is much research, and every school class has the obligation to visit at least one concentration camp. Mostly they visit many concentration camps, not only one, but So the young people are well educated in this respect.
Во Берлинското метро се сретнавме со оваа 15-годишна девојка, за да позборуваме за чувствата на оваа најмлада генерација во врска со тешкото германско минато. Децата низ образовниот систем редовно ги посетуваат концентрационите логори за да се соочат со епизоди од ужасите кои се случувале таму. Соочени со оваа грда историска реалност и кај овие деца има отворени прашања.
Why this happened? Why people think that other humans are less worth it? And I think that's a question you can't answer, but I can't imagine that people think like that. And that's something that, yeah, I want to know why this happened.
So you said that you have a discussion in the classroom. So could you resume some of the discussion that you found the most interesting for you?
I had a meeting with some guy who was in a concentration camp, and he told us that we have to look now in this time that this not happen again. And I think in Germany it's a big point in this time because there are things that don't go right, and his words was really impressive for me because he said that we have to care about that this happened not again, and that we have to care about that. It's something that's really bad because we shouldn't care. Yeah.
It was somebody from your class?
No, it was, we watched a film, a documentary, and the man who was in this documentary was in a concentration camp and he visited us. And we talk about that.
He told you the story about it.
Yeah, he said,
What he lived.
Yeah, what he...
He was one of the survivors of the...
Yeah. So he was really old, but his words was really clear.
На потребата да се разбере како е можно раѓање на еден монструозен систем во една демократија каква што била Германија во 30-тите години од минатиот век, инсистира и професорот Brechtian.
You have a wide variety of people who were murdered during the Third Reich and objects of perpetration. And to understand that this kind of policy was a reflection of the German society as a whole, that is the difficult process. And that you have to ask, how is it possible, or that was the challenge to understand, how is it possible that in 1933 you have, at 2nd January 1933, you have several political parties, you have a press, you have public discourse, you have literature, you have music, etc. And then the ideological drive of National Socialism takes over and over and over, and by 1939 you are trying to conquer the whole of Europe, and during the process of conquering the whole of Europe you kill millions of people during this process. How did this come up, and why did people in 1939 or 1941 still think, well, I'm doing the right, proper thing in supporting all this?
Па затоа е нужно не само да се запаметат фактите од минатото, туку и да се развива критичкото мислење.
But the general approach, if one can say it in a nutshell, is to educate people to independent thinking. First of all, not to memorize numbers or figures or whatever, but to be able to make up your own mind regardless of what concepts are offered to you. And that is the main purpose of schools in general.
Инаку нашите главни соговорници Хес и Моравиц и покрај сенни што имаат минато, продолжуваат да живеат со траумата наследена од претходните генерации. Франк Моравиц во рамките на франко-германското помирување и пријателство постојано работи на проекти чија цел е да се разбере опасноста која се крие во популизмот, кој на власт го донесе Хитлер.
For the generation afterwards, it's maybe another problem. It's not to forget. It's to say, not to say now after 70 years enough is enough, so we don't speak anymore about this time. It's far away. No, it's to make it clear for them that Holocaust, that the criminal Nazi regime is an important part of the German history. It's not the only part, but it's a very important part, very crucial part, and that we have to remember and that we have to understand. For example, it's not about the question of feeling guilty. It's about the question of feeling responsible. This is very, very different. Feeling guilty means it's a moral attitude, but feeling responsible means what I learned about this history and what are the lessons learned and what is also the link to today, because fascism is not over. I mean, it's over in the democracies, but fascism is an element which is always present and always a danger and always there. So we have to take care that it's not coming back.
Rainer Hess пак е постојано на релација Stuttgart-Auschwitz. Досега бил 35 пати со стотици студенти на кои ме раскажува својата приказна. Секој одење таму за него е ново доживување на траумата, која во наследство му ја оставил дедо му.
And I was now 35 times there with over 4,000 students. And the first thing I do, put my hand in my pocket, and I walk down to the gallows, go around, so make sure they really hung him there. So, and then I can start with a lesson or talk with the students. Before, it's impossible for me.
Why?
I think it's a mental problem. So I need that kind of, it's like a ritual for me, a ritual. To go there, to walk around, so to make sure, okay, now I'm back in Auschwitz. I'm on that place he creates, on that horror place.
Rainer Hess е посветен на едукацијата на новите генерации, во обид да ги научи да сочуваат Германија од повторување на историјата.
They have the same, they have a little bit more guilt. And I always said to the German students, don't feel guilty. There is no need from your side. You were not even born. How can you feel guilty for something your ancestors did 70 years ago? You have to feel guilty if you allow it that it happens again, that it repeats itself. Then you have to feel guilty. But now it's your choice. You can make it. You can make that choice that it never happens. And that's your fight. So, think about that.
Хес денеска смета дека работата не е завршена и покрај сите вложени напори на институциите и поединци каков што е тој. Поддршката која денеска во Германија ја добиваат екстремно десните партии е показател, како што вели, дека не е завршена докрај работата со процесот на помирувањето.
If they would accept, then they would accept it as part of the German, how you call that, like inheritance of the Germans. But we not really begun with it, with reconciliation. We wrote a lot of books, we make a lot of events. But if we would really learn out of the past, we wouldn't have NPD, AFD, Third Way, things like that, Pegida. We wouldn't have that. We would have it, of course. Well, you cannot take them out of any society. You have always nuts people who proclaim that and said, okay, it's part of us. No, but we don't have it that they become a power in the parliament, like we have right now with the AFD. And we start doing the same problem again, we ignore them. Why we ignore people like this? Why we not question their motives, their agenda? Why we not question it? So nobody really want to have their fingers in that game.
Германците речиси 80 години минуваат низ болен процес на прифаќање на едно тешко подносливо наследство, какво што е она кој им го остави Хитлер. И колку повеќе времето минува, толку поважно станува да се сочува сеќавањето, како што пред 2 години изјави германскиот председател Штајнмајер, извинувајќи им се на пољаците на 80 годишнината од упадот на фашистичката Хитлерова армија во Полска. Германија храбро го прифати товарот од нивните предци, живејќи со него без обиди да релативизира неговата тежина. Оваа храброст на повојна демократска Германија е и темелот на кој денеска лежи едно од најразвиените и најдемократски општества во светот.